When kids leave home and the familiar day-to-day parenting rhythms suddenly cease, know that just as God's prepared your children, He has also been preparing you for this next season of impact for Him.
Welcome to the Q4 Impact Podcast, where through scripture, story, and conversation, we inspire you to make an impact all the way through the fourth quarter of your life. It is the time of year when many find themselves anticipating a new season, the proverbial empty nest, celebrated by some, mourned by others, but for most, it's likely a blend of the two. Today, we have a special guest with us who, along with his wife, Ebby, and through much laughter and many tears, is learning to navigate this new season. If you're watching online, you may also notice that his last name mirrors that of my co-host, Ron. That is what you are seeing is correct. It is Judah Regenstreif, Ron's son, his middle son, I might add. And we are delighted to have him join us today. So welcome, Judah.
Thank you, Susan. This is exciting. I'm looking forward to this next, 20, 30 minutes or so that we have together, maybe a little longer, to talk about some pretty near and dear topics that Ebby and I are navigating through right now. And so, and to be able to do this with, of course, with my dad and Susan, with you as well, who we've known each other, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 30 plus years.
I think you are right. We've done a lot together.
Yeah, we've done a lot of life together. So it's I'm looking forward to this. This is an honor to be asked to be a part of this.
Thank you.
And this is another first for me, doing a podcast with my son. That's I don't know if that would even ever was a thought that would occur to be on a bucket list, but watching you, Judah, raise your girls was just beyond what I had even imagined or hoped for. You and Abby have been just model parents, and it's clearly seen in the character of both of your daughters, and you've excelled. And I'm not just saying that because they're my granddaughters and I love them, and that's obvious, but you've just done such an amazing job. And now this part of the parenting role is different and is changed. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this has been arguably the hardest of the parenting season for sure. I'm in now. I guess I finished my first official year of having both daughters gone. Our older daughter, Jaden, just finished her sophomore year of college. Selah, younger daughter, finished her freshman year. So we're officially through our first year of empty nesting, though they're in college. They've not, finished that part. But it's been a tough season of adjusting to them not being around, them, not being here for us to talk with every day and have dinner together and go see, their tennis matches and dance competitions, and just being here with their friends coming over, getting to see and know who their friends are and the kind of families that they come from, and just the overall engagement, that we have with our daughters, or that we had with our daughters, has all changed. And so we're now, in the season where they're exploring new friendships and new relationships and experiences that, don't involve mom and dad. And so how do we navigate that with them has been a challenge. And so, I'm looking forward to kind of diving into some of that this morning.
I love that, Judah. And you're right, as you referenced earlier, we have known each other a lot of years. And I still remember, it feels like yesterday, when I watched you and Evie become parents for the first time to Jaden in those early years and some of those parenting struggles. But what has stood out, and this is going to kind of mirror what Ron said, I have so delighted to observe just what a deep and healthy parent-child relationship the two of you have fostered with your girls. And that has been beautiful to watch. So you just spoke a little bit about some of the challenges this first full year of being empty nesters has been. But it also didn't catch you unawares. You knew it was coming as they neared graduation from high school. Tell us a little bit about your experience as you approached this transition. What were you thinking? How were you preparing?
Yeah. Truth be told, I would say that my wife and I didn't do a great job in preparing for this season. I think for us, it was, we took an approach more of the time or the window that we had with them was, of course, shrinking. And so our mindset was take advantage, of that remaining time. And so I think if anything, maybe we poured more of ourselves into them. And though I wouldn't say I regret it, because I think it's hard to refute the fruit of my relationship with my daughters and say, gosh, I wish I would have spent less time with them, or, et cetera. But I think as a married couple, we didn't spend the time in preparing for, hey, the kids are gone. And what does that look like for Abby and I, and what we throw ourselves into and get involved with and engage with, and how do we navigate the quiet nights and the empty bedrooms and the lack of noise, around the house. And so, truthfully or candidly, I would say in that regard, that was a life lesson learned. And I know, a big premise of this whole podcast that you all are doing, Dad, that you're doing with Susan, and helping people prepare for their tomorrow, for this season. That would be my encouragement to people of take advantage of the time that you have with your children, because it's 18 years, and and then that's gone, give or take, right? You have the rest of your life, God willing, to build on your marriage and your relationship. But it really should start before they head out. So you don't find yourself kind of in this moment and season of going, oh boy, now what? But I'm confident that we'll find that. And so, I know that the Lord is moving on both of our hearts, and He's walking with us in this season. But it's been a struggle. It's been a stretch. And I wish that we would have spent more time in preparing for this moment.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we try to kind of highlight on our shows are trying to look ahead, not to the point where you're in prison of trying to always look ahead and not living in the day. But I think certainly there is a lot to say for preparing for the transitions of life. And I think you probably would agree that the transition is bigger than maybe you thought it might be. And so what would you say or want to share with those who are, getting close to that transition period?
Yeah, I think that one of the main issues that Abby and I are working through right now is this idea, this concept of being an invited voice in their life versus a spoken voice. And what I mean by that is I think that, the first 18 years or so, it was just the four of us, and me as the dad, and my wife, as the mom, and we're sitting around the table, and it's primarily our voices that are speaking into our kids' lives. And it's our voices that are guiding and leading and directing. And of course, it's a season of them developing their walks with the Lord, learning to hear from Him, learning to hear from the Holy Spirit. And of course, they have friends that are speaking into their lives as well. But for the most part, we were the main voice, and maybe the ultimate voice, so to speak. Obviously, the Lord is the ultimate voice, but to speak into their lives. And as they progress and get older, and it really starts at probably 16, 17, maybe 17, 18. But then, of course, as they go off to college, all of a sudden you find yourself not being that main voice, that they have actually invited other voices into their lives. And if we're not careful in allowing that to happen, what I believe will happen is that our voice will start to get minimized and actually be pushed out of the equation, and will no longer be invited to speak into their lives. I think it's a normal, natural thing as our kids grow and develop and mature, their minds, their worldview, their knowledge, that they're going to have different ideas, different thoughts, different opinions, and we need to allow that. And so there's this tension of, I'm still their dad. They're young adults. I have a 20-year-old and a 19-year-old, so I would not describe them as fully adulting yet, or being full mature adults. So there's still a need, I believe, and a place for my voice in their lives. But if I don't relinquish some of that and allow them to add some additional voices in their lives, and hopefully I get to be a part of choosing and selecting who those additional voices may be, but maybe not. And even in that, I have to release and relinquish that to them. And so my goal, our goal, is to maintain, another way we've talked about it in our home is to maintain a seat at their table. That if I force my opinion, if I'm speaking too much into their lives, if I'm not listening more than talking in this season, then what they may do is pick up their plate and napkin and knife and fork, and they may go sit at a different table. And so I want to be at their table. We want to be at their table and still be an invited voice into their lives. So that's what we're kind of working through now, learning that tension and that balance of, I still have some say, some voice, in their lives. And I think that's God ordained. I don't think there's a statute of limitations on children honor your mother and your father. But we need to pull back a little bit, and allow them to discover their own voice and really learn to hear from the Holy Spirit themselves. And so that's been something that's been big these last days, if you will.
I love that. And I love your word discover. And I think that's probably fair to apply to this whole season. It's a season of discovery, not only for your girls as they move into adulting, and there's so much new that they're discovering, but for you and Evie, for any couple facing a season of empty nesting, how do you discover this new season? So that's what I want to shift us to a little bit, because you are discovering, you are adjusting. And one of the things we've also talked about in our podcast is that our actions always stem from our thoughts. So I'd like to know a bit more of what's going on in your thinking about this season, and how are these thoughts transitioning and how you're now going forward in what God has planned for you.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn to bite my tongue and, to be slow to speak and quick to listen. And I'm trying to slow my pace down when I'm interacting with the girls, and hopefully that translates to really every area, any area of my life, and which is a challenge for me. I'm not quite an A-type personality, but I'm maybe close. Maybe I'm a B+. But I do feel like I have a lot of energy, and I like to spin a lot of plates, and I like to have a lot of things going on, and so even in that, trying to slow down and listen more to the Holy Spirit as it pertains to all areas of my life. But it's shifting my mindset of saying, God, these are your girls. They always have been. You entrusted them in my direct care, our direct care, for these 19 plus years. And not that care ever ends. They'll always be my girls, and I will always feel a sense of wanting to cover them and protect them and provide for them, but it's in different ways. And so we have to process through that and think through, how do I best support my daughters in this season as they're discovering their voice and finding their place, their calling, their mission, for their lives. And then I think likewise too for Evie and I, of Lord, give us a vision and a passion for now life beyond those 18, 19 parenting years. Help us to find something that we both are passionate about, that we both, care about, and that we want to pour our hearts and our lives into. So you all are people that I look up to, and I'm watching and are observing how you're living your lives. And so I like to look at the generation or two ahead of me. And so I'm seeing how you're living, and I'm saying, God, I want my life to be reflective of Susan, you, and Dad, you as well. I want my life to maintain having a purpose. And the main purpose I felt and believed for the last 18, 19, 20 years was to raise my two daughters and Lord willing, God willing, produce, two God-fearing, God-loving girls who love each other, love people, and love the Lord. And I think we did a pretty good job with that, and I think they're on their way. And so now it's, okay, Lord, what's next for us? And we have to be intentional in asking those questions and listening, and having our eyes open to see, what it may be that the Lord brings across our paths.
Yeah, gosh, I'm listening to you, and my mind is going all kinds of places, and trying to remember the feelings that I had, when my three sons were in the same stages. And maybe we've talked about this for the last year, you and I alone, but I don't know, is there anything you may say, this, what Evie and I maybe started to do, this didn't work, and what Evie and I now just started to do, we're finding it is working? Maybe share a mistake you might have made, or something where you had to catch yourself and say, nah, I better not, I need to shift. I need to move over a lane or two.
Yeah.
What comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I think along the topic of being slow to speak and quick to listen, I think there are times that, sometimes instinctually you jump to preserve, protect, provide. And I think there's, of course, a time and a place for that. But I think that we could have done better releasing our girls maybe even a little bit faster, to starting to discover their own voice and their own opinions and their own sense of direction and right and wrong. We'll pull back the curtain even more here a little bit. Literally as late as yesterday, as we were taking our older daughter to the airport for her to head to the JH Ranch. It's a little plug, to serve all summer. Highly recommend. I had a good conversation with Jaden about her feeling like we've not released her enough, that she wants more autonomy, in making decisions, and not feeling like we are giving her all the to-dos and the reminders and the answers to her questions. So I think in hindsight, to answer your question maybe more specifically, I think we could have started that earlier. Seeing the progression that the Lord had been doing in the girls' lives, and seeing the maturity, and kind of gauging that, and using wisdom of saying, okay, I'm looking at, I'm observing, I'm watching my daughters. They're starting to develop a solid track record of not only their times with the Lord, their ability to hear the Lord, their time in worship, their love for people, right? Evaluating that, seeing that there's growth, and starting to entrust more and more to them, in preparation for this season, when they then leave our home and are not necessarily under our physical covering anymore. I think maybe they would have felt, at least Jaden communicated the other day, she would have felt actually a little bit more prepared for life had we done that a little bit sooner. So I think that would probably be something that, in hindsight, that would be a good learning lesson, for us.
I love that. I love that. What I hear you saying is applying the wisdom the Lord is giving you as a parent to your children, knowing them, but also being a student of your children. Really assessing their strengths, their abilities, their readiness. It makes me think, and maybe a silly example by comparison, but I remember getting into that 15-year-old age and asking my mom, will I be allowed to date at 16? And I wanted this hard stop. And her very wise answer was, well, know when you're ready. And I ended up dating before 16 because I had the maturity. And that's what I hear you're saying, by the leading of the Holy Spirit, really assessing and studying your children and their ability to then intentionally take steps to give them more empowerment and autonomy. And it does require slowing down, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. and every child is different, right? As we know. And so even that of asking the Lord, give me wisdom and discernment for each kid, because they're going to be on a different track, of growth and in their walks with the Lord. So I think that's important, that maybe we don't get in a system or too rigid of a structure of how to parent, and really evaluating based on each kid's giftings and strengths and their heart and character and where they're at with the Lord, and allow the Lord to use His wisdom in helping parent and shape, our kids. Yeah.
It is so apparent that you have been, still are, an incredibly dedicated dad. And I know Evie is the same. And I know, because I know you and have through the years, that a part of being a dedicated parent has been reading parenting books. It's been seeking the wisdom of others, like you alluded to. I know you and your dad have had many talks through the years about parenting, as well as others with whom you would seek as a mentor. So I'm wanting for you to share with those listening, what have you discovered in the way of resources that for this season of empty nesting, now that you're shifting hats, so to speak, a little bit, what are you turning to for help, for resources in this season?
Yeah. Well, one idea behind that is, I mentioned earlier, of always trying to find somebody older, wiser, to learn from. It's always been, I don't know how or why or where that came from, but I honestly remember even as a young kid that was something that maybe it's because I was taught to always respect my elders. That's probably the root of it. But I've always valued and appreciated the men in my life. And I remember actually a long time ago thinking, wow, I have been so blessed by being surrounded by such incredible men. Of course, let alone just my dad, and what an incredible father he was, who I think put in me the desire to be a great dad, because I felt like I had a great dad. But other men in my life, if I could name drop a Michael Goldstone, who I know has been on this podcast, and a Chuck Shoemake, a Max Lyle. These were men that were directly, indirectly in my life, where I knew at the drop of a hat, if I needed something, I could call them. And they were men of God that I respected and trusted. So, long-winded answer, but my first is still finding people that are a season ahead of me, who have kids that are older than mine, who are succeeding in life, and wanting to glean from them and share our burdens and struggles with, and get their wisdom. From a material standpoint, from a literature standpoint, I actually just recently discovered this book, and it was given to us or told us to read by a neighbor friend, but it's called Doing Life with Your Adult Children. And the subtitle is Keep Your Mouth Shut and the Welcome Mat Out. Doing Life with Your Adult Children, Keep Your Mouth Shut and the Welcome Mat Out, by Jim Burns. I just started reading that recently. And I think it's along the lines of what we were saying earlier, of in the season, trying to be intentional about being that invited voice, and being slow to speak and quick to listen. But this book actually has been, so far, I think I'm in chapter 4, so it is relatively new, but it's actually been a breath of fresh air. But I do find it interesting. I have not found a whole lot of literature on this season. Or what I have found is there's information, and maybe we say training, on adults learning to let the kids fly and leave the nest, but there's not a lot of books, education training for the kids on how to leave the nest with respect and honor. And so, there's a tension that's happening in this season of not only we have to learn to do things differently as parents, and the children have to learn, our kids have to learn to not shut us out and not forget, where they came from and the place that God has of us in their lives. So, anyways, that's a book that I've enjoyed so far.
And I love hearing you say that, because maybe that is a book that God's purpose may be for you to write. You never can tell.
You never can tell. We'll see about that. We'll see about that. Maybe there's some people on this podcast that could help me write a book.
Mm-hmm. I know one.
I know one or two. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as we get towards the end, what's coming up in my mind is a couple things, but I think the most important thing I want to say is this season, this time in a parent's life when the kids leave the house, it's on the calendar. The date is kind of somewhat set. And so as parents, you really need to make sure that in those years leading up to that date, that you've done the work that is needed to do so that when the day comes, you've invested enough of your time and your love so that you're not panicking because your kids are unstable and they're undisciplined and they haven't developed a maturity and a sense of responsibility. And so, if you've neglected to be intentional with them, you don't wait till the last few weeks because it's too late. And so it's this emphasis to really put the time in. And then when you talked about knowing the state, studying the kids, not to underestimate or undervalue their level of maturity, but also not to overestimate and to think that now, they don't need any input and, think that they're going to do well when they really aren't on a track to do well, which then leads back to the necessity of being good parents throughout the whole journey. Yeah. And, because the day's going to come and you're not going to know what's going on in their lives like you do when they're at home. So,
yeah, Dad, I love that. If I could chime in on that, Susan, I love the word intentionality. And I know that you have used that multiple times on various podcasts, and it's in every area of our life. And the intentionality, to your point, has to be consistent throughout the stages of parenting. It doesn't just start at the beginning when you first find out you're pregnant. Hey, I'm going to be intentional about being a good dad. But it's in every season and every stage because they're so different. And part of that intentionality of parenting is the end stage of the game as well, of being intentional in preparing for their departure. That I would say candidly and would confess that we miss that. We miss that part of intentionality, be intentional about preparing our hearts, our minds for when they go. And so I love that because, I know that you've talked about that on all kinds of topics, from finances to, walk with the Lord to relationships, et cetera. And it goes with parenting too. We've got to live as intentional people if we want to grow and if we want to be all that God has called and designed us and created us to be. And so, yeah, I appreciate you using that word. You intentionally using that word, intention.
I started reading another book yesterday, and a little 3-word quote from it is, intentionality brings greatness. Mm-hmm. And I liked that. And to your point, whatever we do, and that I think is maybe the perfect segue for me to wrap up this episode, because for those listening, no matter where you are in your parenting journey, we do hope you've been encouraged to be intentional. The onset of empty nesting may not be where you find yourself. We know that has been the emphasis of today's conversation, but I think what we can all take away and recognize is that in whatever stage we do find ourselves, the next one's always coming much more quickly than we could have anticipated. And it calls us to be intentional in our preparation for that. We can all benefit from applying the words of Psalm 90, verse 12. And it says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom." So if you've enjoyed hearing from Judah today, please also check out the blog corresponding to this episode, because he wrote it. And I loved it when I got a chance to work with it and put it on our website. And that website is myq4impact.org. So Judah, thank you again for being with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Love you both and grateful for the opportunity.
Thanks. We invite you to tune in again next week for guidance on how to find church unity amid differences. Thanks for listening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Q4 Impact Podcast. To continue receiving encouragement and practical tips on how to live with purpose and meaning through the many changes and challenges of life, please be sure to subscribe. And please share it with others you think may also benefit.